Hi everybody in Spirit Shack Land, it's Nutty Barry here, your favourite friend and non-stop yabberer. And I'm in a different space tonight. I'm actually lying on our bed because my back is killing me. So if I squeal or tweak or go a lot, please understand that. And at some point John will make an appearance and we'll do his usual hello John bit. Welcome to another part in our occasional mini-series on the 7 principles of national spiritualism. I'm actually going to jump over principle number 5 today, which is called personal responsibility, because that in itself, I think, is a philosophy in its own right and deserves a much longer time than I have available at this current time. So I'm going to talk tonight about principle number 6. Compensation and retribution in the hereafter for all good and evil deeds done on earth. Now, most of the religious practices in the world, the current ones, the traditional ones, the pre-Christian, pre-Judaic, pre-Islam ones, all have a theory and a practice or a creed or dogma regarding getting pats on the back from the divine source of that particular religion, who we call God for simplicity's sake, or something not very pleasant from the other side if you don't do too well. Largely in simplistic forms, and I know people are going to put comments and say you've made it far too simple. Here's John. Hello, John.
Hello, John bit.
That was the hello, John bit. Lie down now. Where was I? Yes. All of them talk in some way about how you get a certain amount of ticks at the end of your life in the book of life, or a certain amount of crosses, and the net result, if you've got more ticks than crosses, you go up and get your wings and halo and a harp and all the other bits and pieces. And if you get more crosses, then you go down below into hell, or whatever that particular religion calls the afterlife in the netherworlds, where you get eternal punishment, and you don't so much get a quoit or a halo and a harp. You tend to get a little trident and horns and play with Satan for the rest of your life, Beelzebub and all the various other names that the Dark Lord is known by. It could be Voldemort. Oh, I can't say that. The V word from Harry Potter. I think Buddhism, if we're looking at traditional religious practices, has it the best way because they link karma into it. And karma has an effect in spiritualism as well. We very much believe in the karmic response to life. If you do something good in your life, you get something back equally good, if not more so. And if you do something wrong or something negative, I won't say evil because I find it hard to accept a concept of simple black and white good and evil. Oh, I just made the sign of a cross. It takes me back to my old life. Because there's always many different shades of good and evil, and they're sort of blurred at the edges. It's the old thing of is a person a terrorist or are they a freedom fighter? It depends on your point of view at the time. For some people, Nelson Mandela, in fact for most people, Nelson Mandela was a freedom fighter. But if you were part of the white majority rule in South Africa before he was sent to Robben's Island, he was a terrorist, and he did engage in some anti-establishment activities, and some of them were in his own book, Long Walk to Freedom, which I would highly recommend to anybody who wants to get an understanding of true spirituality in modern form to read. He talks about the fact that some of the things he did, even though at the time, in his, I think he calls it the greenness of his naivety, he saw as being proactive and positive for his minority voting wise, certainly the majority of the population of the coloured and Asian communities in South Africa during that vile thing that we, the British, started, of course, in our segregational rule in that colony as it was then. But since his release and his later years as president of South Africa, then the godfather of all decent people, as he seemed to be, Mr. Mandela was seen very much as a freedom fighter, fighting for what we accept today to be human rights. But going back, at the time, he was very much seen as a terrorist. And that's why I say there's a blurring at the edges of good and evil. The principle talks about good and evil, so we'll talk about good and evil. I said we believe in karma in spiritualism. I think the majority of us do anyway. There are some who see the science of spiritualism as being preeminent rather than the philosophy. For me, though, it's the philosophy, because it's what enables us to live our lives as fully rounded and develop spiritual people that counts. And although the science is important because it allows the proof and the evidence that we all seek, the philosophy is the bedrock upon which that science then sits, because without the philosophy, the science doesn't really make a great deal of sense. So, compensation and retribution. So, ticks, compensation, crosses, retribution. In spiritualism, we do not have a concept of heaven and hell. The reason the early faiths thought that heaven was above the skies was because the sun was up there, light was up there, therefore the brightness and that big burny ball in the sky, when people weren't worshipping it because they had worshipped it, became the natural resting place of God, the angels, the seraphim, the cherubim, and all the great and good people of history. And in a time of less educational understanding and less advancement scientifically, we saw volcanoes and earthquakes bringing up magma and eruptions and fire and hellfire and brimstone being poured out and belched over the earth's green pastures and devastating everything in its wake. That had to be a bad thing, so that was where hell was. So for many, many years, and even today to some people, heaven is up above and hell is down below. And there are some people, some exceptionally devout Bible or Quran or Torah-based followers who believe that heaven is above the clouds and hell is in the earth's crust. And they believe if you mine deep enough, you're going to come across Satan. We accept them more as allegories, representations of, in human form, of good and evil at their sublimest or highest or lowest form. So I said about karma. In spiritualism, we very much believe in karmic response. If you do something good will happen back to you. It may not happen straight away, but it will happen. If we do something bad, the opposite applies. We will receive something negative in our lives as a direct response of our activity in a negative way. Now, I say it may not happen straight away. It may not even happen in this physical lifetime on earth. It may take until we translate to the higher service or the higher life and move to the summer lands or the spirit realms before we find out what that compensation or that retribution is. In that case, this is where my personal philosophy sits. I believe that the summer lands, as I have learnt to call them, the spirit realms, are one extending ladder. Not Jacob's ladder, a genuine ladder of progress. We all start at the bottom, or at a point in our first incarnation on Earth, and as we progress, we climb a step or a rung or two. If we do less well in our lives and we take a few retrograde steps, then we may drop down 1 or 2 levels. Within that ladder structure, the highest point, you have sublime divinity. It's where we've grown as far as we possibly can as spiritual beings, and we sit amongst the angels and the cherubim and seraphim. We sit amongst the masters and mistresses of the spirit world, those great evolved souls such as Sanat Kumara, Lady Kuan Yin, Serapis Bey, Kuthumi, all of these you can go and research, the masters of the spirit realms, the Master Jesus, Jesus the Nazarene. They sit slightly above our guides and helpers such as Silver Birch, or in my case Morning Star and Yautsu, who you'll have seen in other episodes, and will have actually met Morning Star in a recent Q&A session, which I will be redoing just into the first week of the new year, so watch out for the adverts for that, and make sure you book your diary spot on Facebook Live link. I'm going to take my glasses off because I can see it's reflecting the light quite badly. Now I can't see you, but I'm actually looking at myself, so it's probably not a bad thing. So we have this ladder, and at some point near the bottom of this ladder, we have the opposite of the highest realms. We have the lowest realms. And they were taught to me by my now ex-mother-in-law, a wonderful medium called Pam Creek, who, whether we still get on personally, which unfortunately we don't, I still have the absolute utmost respect for her because she brought me into this wonderful movement. She was the first person to have me sit in circle and help me develop my earlier gifts, and I owe her a great deal of gratitude for that, which is something I will always publicly confess to, and I give her a nodding respect for that. She talks about the grey worlds, and I've heard other people refer to them as well. Now, it might be the nearest thing, if you like, to hell. It's the sort of place, it's a mixture of hell and purgatory. If you're a Catholic, you'll understand what purgatory is, that space we all go to while we're awaiting the second coming of Christ, if we're traditional Catholic and Protestant Christians. Catholic and Anglican Christians, no, not necessarily Protestant, but Anglican Christians. And it's a place where the less savoury in human life will reside, quite possibly for all eternity, because they simply have not developed beyond any sort of way that be classed as an advancement of their soul. So you have the likes of Hitler, Genghis Khan, certain former politicians who may have led less than favourable lives, who may have done great damage to the people they were elected to represent or to serve. These are the sort of people who have very little self-regard for their actions. They believe their actions are right, that they're called to do what they do because they're more advanced than we are, they have more authority than we do, and therefore they don't need checks and balances like the rest of us do. But the fact is, we all do. We all need somebody or some system that reminds us of our humanity, of our latent failings or lack of willingness to accept our shortcomings and to grow. But we also need something that reminds us that what we do is good when we do it, that when we undertake a particular selfless act, there is something there to remind us that we have done something good and we deserve a pat on the back for it. We don't go into this world expecting praise and adulation every time we help an elderly person across the street, or we do Bob a job when I was a scout, or anything like that. We do it because we're community spirited and we want to help people with no sense of self-reward or a public statue to be erected in our honour or anything like that. We do it because it's the decent and the right thing to do. And that is exactly where compensation and retribution come into play. When we do those little things that may seem insignificant to other people, but to the person or the people that we have helped or we have done something for their benefit, totally selfless, with nothing to gain for it from ourselves other than the satisfaction of a job well done, that, I believe, is when we truly gain that compensation. So it could be something great. It could be becoming a UN ambassador. It could be raising millions for comic relief or children in need or the charity of your choice. It could be trekking from the Land's End to John O'Groats and back, or walking the Rocky Mountains in a clown costume, carrying a bowl of fruit on your head, or paying for the inoculations against HIV or malaria to 1 million children in Africa. Those sort of big scale things, they are worthy of compensation, and I'm sure people do get compensated for it. But it's the little things as well. It's the noticing that the milk hasn't been taken in off the step of your elderly neighbour and just knocking on and checking that they're okay. Or it's seeing somebody fall down in the street and stopping to help them get up and sort their shopping out. These little acts that we do, it can be as simple, as smiling at the checkout girl in your local supermarket or mall. She may be having a rotten day, but she's in a customer services related job, and everybody looks miserable when they get to the checkout. Nobody ever looks happy. We will always try and say hello to the cashier. If you've got a name badge on, we use it, and we'll have a joke with them or a little chat. And sometimes they're completely stumped because this has taken them out of their robotic stage and they actually have to think and communicate. And I like to think that we leave them feeling a bit better about their day because they're not in a particularly well-paid job. I don't think people leave school or go to see the school works guidance counsellor saying, I want to be a checkout girl in Lidl's or Asda's or Walmart, wherever you are in the world. It may be somebody's ideal of a job, and good on them if it is, but I don't think we make that choice. Neither do we make the choice or the decision to be unemployed. It just is something that happens. And somebody may be having a rotten day, and just those 30 seconds that you spent talking to them or smiling at somebody as you walk past them in the street, or something I saw the other day. There was a funeral procession coming down the road in Boscombe, and I just walked in front of it and got to the other side of the road, and I could have carried on, but I come from a family of funeral directors. I used to be a priest. I turned round at the curbside, I waited for the cortege to draw alongside me, and I just bowed my head to the coffin. It's something I was brought up to do, and in the old days it was something that everybody would do. Men would lift their hats and in respect, and ladies would stop and just bow their heads a little, whatever. I did a bit of both, I suppose. And as the hearse drove off round the roundabout, the first limousine came up and went past me, and I happened to catch the eye of a lady who was sat in the window seat of the limousine, and she just went. And then I realised she was the only person in the limousine. There were no other cars following. I think it was probably just her, the funeral director, and the deceased. And it made me realise that just taking that second just to stop and show respect. I don't know who the person was in the coffin. Well, I know they weren't in there, it was just their body. But they may have been a very private person, clearly didn't have many family, unless the rest of the family were meeting them at the graveside or at the crematorium. But she mouthed thank you to me, and that made me feel really quite special, that I'd done something that had a value. And then went into the post office and dropped my trousers. That's another story. Basically, my trousers split. Ended up falling over in the post office, to much amusement from everybody who was in there, but there we go. So these little things that we do, they can have such a positive impact on somebody's life, and that's what you get compensated for, as well as the big stuff. But the retribution can be just the same. If you do something bad, you'll notice, if you think back in your life when you pulled your sister's hair, or you nicked the last Ferrero Rocher, or thinking of other things, your sister threw one of your mother's heated roller pins, metal pins, onto a 3-pin plug and fused the entire house, or you, wanting to see what would happen, pushed newspaper into the side of a electric socket in your parents' hotel games room and set fire to that room, and the fire brigade had to be called. And the costs that were incurred by a wasted call out, and I got my retribution on that one pretty darn quick, I can tell you, and my rear end certainly got the retribution, and I didn't sit down in comfort for a good couple of days afterwards. But I was naive and stupid, and I was a child. My sister was equally stupid with the heated roller pin, and people who pull their sister's hair, and people who eat the last Ferrero Rocher. Other candy are available. We all get our retribution, and it does happen. Now, you may not see that as anything religious, because it isn't. But spiritual, it is. And the reason it's spiritual is because it's a learning curve for us. As we go through our lives, certain obstructions will be put in our way. Certain opportunities will be put in our way. And the way in which we deal with those opportunities or obstructions very much determines how fast we grow as spiritual people. And if you have the opportunity to learn, take every opportunity so to do, because in undertaking those obstructions or opportunities, you have a chance to grow and advance and become a more well-rounded person, even if it is something as silly as getting a smack on the backside from your father's slipper for doing a very, very silly and dangerous thing, as I did as a child. One, it teaches you not to do it again. Or, two, it teaches you that if you do something good, you get something back in return. So there we go. Compensation and retribution in the hereafter. We talk about in the hereafter because although some of the compensatory or retributional rewards and punishments, if that's the right word, may happen in this physical lifetime, there's nothing to say it won't happen until we reach our spirit state again. And it's in the learning of the negative stuff as well as the positive stuff, if you remember that ladder, that helps us climb the ladder of spiritual advancement. So take every opportunity, however banal, however pointless, however ridiculous, to learn from every opportunity. Accept your punishment with dignity and sublimation to the fact that you know you've done something wrong and you deserve something negative to happen back to rebalance things. But accept your compensation with humility Nobody likes a smart ass. And it's also part of a group effort. Because when we learn something, we can then pass that on, and we should pass on the education that we've achieved, that we've acquired by our experiences, so that we can help other people. There's no I in team, and this is a team effort. We're all members of the human team. And especially in this world where there is so much sadness at the moment, and I'm thinking, of course, of Syria and Aleppo and Mosul in particular, and the Yemen and other places where there are so many problems. We are part of a global team, Team Humanity. And when we learn something useful, we should pass it on to our friends and our neighbours and help them to learn as well as we have learned. So with that, I wish you every blessing. Watch out for an advert very shortly about a Facebook Live link for our next Q&A session. I'm not sure whether it'll be Morningstar or Yao-Tzu, but one of them will certainly come and answer your questions on a spiritual nature. And until we meet again, Namaste, and may you be blessed.